Today can go one of two ways. The car's either gonna start up and run beautifully, or it doesn't. And I'm really hoping that it's the first option. This is the cheapest E30 I could find in the whole country, and it's been abandoned for the last 5 years. In the last video, we managed to get the engine to turn over. So the engine's alright! Oh my god, what the hell? Today the goal is not just to get this car to start up, but to get it idling and even drive it if I can. And to do that, I need to sort out this fuel pump situation. So I started cracking on with removing the old fuel pump, and it wasn't long till I found a new issue. Oh my god!
Oh my god.
That is so bad. Look at the rust. Yeah, this is the old fuel pump. It's really rusty, and to be honest, so is the fuel tank, so I'm definitely gonna have to change the fuel tank at one point anyway. And as I started to install the new fuel pump, I realized the can of worms I've opened up here. And that's not only because of the new rust I found in the fuel tank, but it's also because of this message. The person who found my E30 saw my videos and got in touch with me. And it turns out the car has quite the story. Not only was the car found in a literal bush, but it turns out it's been sitting there since 2005, which not only means that the car's been abandoned for a lot longer than I thought, but what it could also mean is that the car could have a lot more issues than the person I bought it from originally told me about. But if you guys know anything about me, you know that I'm not gonna give up that easy. So now with the new fuel pump in, we need to test it. And to do that, I need power. So I need to replace the battery and replace the alternator belt, because in my last video, you guys saw that the alternator belt was completely ruined to bits. And once again, it didn't take long for the horror of this car to set in again. Oh. Wow, that is fucking...
Is there anything in there? No.
Shit ton of leaves. Look at this. Look at this.
I want to breathe in there.
Well, I'm going to breathe in a lot of crap from this build. And to be completely honest, I really don't want to find out what was living in there. But now with the airbox out the way, we can move on to removing the alternator belt. Because the alternator acts as a tensioner in the system, we have to loosen the alternator before we can remove the belt. Or so we thought. How'd you get it out?
Oh.
But as it turns out, we have to remove the power steering belt and the fan to get it off or on. But of course, in typical Laura fashion, I didn't have the correct tools to be able to remove the fan. So whilst I waited for them to arrive, we cracked on to removing the bonnet to allow some extra room, and I cracked on to removing the power steering belt. Removing this belt is the same as removing the alternator belt. All you have to do is loosen the power steering pump, push it down so you can get some more slack, and just take the belt off.
Yeah, there you go.
Nice! At this point, I had gotten as far as I could without the tools, so I thought I'd have a look at the cooling system.
Give it a skip.
Oh! Wow! That was dusty as hell!
Someone's been using water.
Ah! Whoa! Looks like my nan.
That's a cremated fam. Dust and that.
I should have honestly took this as a sign for worse things to come, but more on that later, as my tools had finally arrived in an old but familiar car. It's just arrived in my old E46. You're actually looking after it so well. How's the E46 treating you?
It's okay.
Yes, sometimes it's okay. Oh, my door card's still off. Have you fixed the passenger door yet? Passenger door still doesn't work. With that out of the way and with the tools acquired, it was finally time to put everything back together and test if we can actually drive this car. The only reason I removed the power steering belt in the first place is because it sits at the front of the crank pulley, but the alternator belt, which is the one I'm changing, sits at the back of the crank pulley. So to replace it, the power steering belt had to get out the way first. But there's also another thing in the way, and this is where the tool I was waiting for comes in. You see, most new cars have electric fans, but my car has a viscous fan, and these types of fans are connected to the water pump, which my alternator belt is also connected to. So without removing the fan, I cannot get my alternator belt on or off. But if you try to remove this fan with a usual spanner, you'll end up just spinning the water pump. So to remove it, you need two special tools. The first one is kind of like a wrench, but it holds two of the water pump pulley bolts in place so it doesn't move. And the other is a really thin wrench which fits into the remaining gap and cracks open the nut of the fan, which is opposite thread, by the way, in case you needed to know. And with everything buttoned up, it's finally time to put some fuel in the car, connect it to some power, and finally see whether all this work was actually worth it. Right now, Oja's gonna turn on the key, which is gonna prime the fuel pump, and I've got the fuel line here, so if fuel comes out, that means the fuel pump's working, and I can hook it back up, and hopefully get this car to start up. Well.
Look, that's it.
Nothing's coming out.
So that's ignition on?
Yeah.
I can't feel anything. But then we remembered the dodgy wiring in the old fuel pump. And sure enough, when we checked the connector, it was wired the wrong way around, which kept blowing fuses for the fuel pump. So as soon as we swapped that over... Off. On?
Crank it.
Okay, crank it, crank it. Oh my god! Oh my god! The fuel pump must work. The fuel came out.
Finally, man.
Oh my god!
Guy, hook it up. I want to hear it run.
So we quickly put the fuel line back on and started the car to see if I could finally drive it. Oh my god. No way! It actually starts off and runs. And just like before, the excitement was very short-lived. Yesterday we got too excited because quickly the car started overheating every time we turned it on, but I'm still determined to make this car drivable, so I've got myself a water pump and hopefully this solves our issues. So let's fix it and find out. And what feels like the 100th time already, the fan, water pump pulley and belt had to come off. And hopefully this will be the last time. To remove the water pump itself, it's actually pretty easy. All you have to do is remove the 4 bolts and just pull it out. But that's on a car that hasn't been abandoned since 2005. Mine was so jammed in there that I had to use a hammer to bash it from side to side just to relieve some pressure. And when we were able to fit a flathead in there to pry it open, it started breaking off into chunks. But eventually with enough hammering side to side and up and down, I was able to wiggle it out. Oh, that looks like diarrhea. Oh my gosh. Jesus Christ, look at all the gunk in there. And then look like diarrhea flying out of that, man. That would definitely explain why I was having the overheating issue. Listen to this. And honestly, after seeing all that build up, I was not sure if I was feeling more scared or confident. But nonetheless, it was time to crack on and put everything back together, hopefully for the last time. The new water pump is actually pretty easy to put back in, and I'm tightening it down in a star pattern just to make sure it sits flush with the engine. But once that was on, it was time to move on to the pulley, belt and fan, and honestly, I've done this so many times I could probably do this blindfolded. But once again, my confidence took a hit because the car was overheating again. But I did have one more place to check, and sure enough, the thermostat was full of limescale buildup and unknown gunk.
I reckon we can use that.
The gunk. And honestly, I'm just so excited to see if I can actually drive this car that I didn't bother buying a new thermostat. And instead, I just gave everything a really good clean, threw the old thermostat in the bin and bled the coolant system, hopefully for the last time. But before we can test it and see if the car can actually drive, we do need to remove the rear brakes first because they're seized. So let's get on to that. And yes, you just heard me right. I'm removing the rear brakes instead of fixing them, but more on that later because when I was jacking up the car, I realized I haven't even checked the condition of the floor yet. It doesn't actually look that bad. All of these lot don't believe me that I don't think the underneath of the car is that bad. I feel like I've seen worse, especially on my MX-5, but they don't believe me so much that they're doing their own checks. And this is Mr. Cameraman, who's come off the camera just to have a look himself. What have you got?
Okay, couple things here. This, initially I was praying that it was just the wing, but
yeah.
I don't really have to poke it, but you guys can already see how rotten that is. So that whole inner and outer seal is definitely getting replaced.
But I'm not gonna lie, I was expecting gaping holes underneath the car, but it's really not bad.
Let me show you the positive side of things, yeah? So if you look under here, so this is your chassis arm, leg. I've been keeping up with Matt Armstrong's E24 restoration. On his E24, his chassis arms are all fully rotten. And look. But you can literally hear it's all solid. I'm poking it as hard as I can with a flathead and it's not going through. There is a couple negatives, a couple positives with this car. It's scary, but not that scary at the same time, so. It's scary. I'm very happy that the chassis underneath looks okay, so in terms of safety, it'll be good. The biggest job will be the front and the rear end. Yeah. The rear, we're gonna cut the quarters out anyway. The boot floor is gonna be changed anyway. Yeah. The engine, are we changing the engine? Let's talk about that in a later video. Shall we move on to this? Let's get. You're giving too many brownies. Let's get the brakes off. So why am I just removing the rear brakes? Well, you see, this car comes with drum brakes, and if you know anything about cars, drum brakes are shit. And because I will be upgrading to disc brakes, there's no point of me trying to fix these brakes because they're no good to anyone. And this job was pretty similar to the water pump. Removing the drum brakes should be pretty simple, but my car likes to be a little bit difficult. Everything was seized, so to get anything off, we had to hammer the life out of it. There you go. Don't think that's been open in years. And the rest of it was pretty easy. As I'm not using the system, I just pulled everything off without a care in the world. And now finally, with the car not overheating and the wheels moving freely, it was finally time to see if I could drive this thing. But the main objective for today was to get this car drivable. But obviously, it has no tax or insurance, so I'm not going to drive it on the road. And instead, I'm going to test it like this.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. You guys really thought that I was gonna forget to tell you how much I've spent? I definitely didn't, so here we go. The first thing on the list is the fuel pump, which was actually pretty cheap. It was only £49.50. And then the alternator belt, which set me back a whopping £13.72p. Next up, the radiator cap, which was missing, cost me £7.50. And lastly, the water pump, which was £32.49p. But now, back to business. I'm sorry to my neighbours. No, yeah, I did stall, but I am sorry to my neighbours. And that's it for today, guys. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure you subscribe because the next video, I'm going to be trying this car apart and trying to fix it up. Oh my God! Stop, OJ. They're good. Oh my God, my neighbours are actually going to kill me.